Good evening. My name is Joni Noble McDonald. I'm from Inglesino, Webster, Wiscasset, and Taylor. Oh, I'm sorry. We are counsel to the joint meeting of Essex and Union Counties, and I'm here with representatives from the joint meeting. Our executive director, Sam McGee, is here. We have our engineering firm, CME Associates, that's here. Henry Johnson will be speaking in a few about these two projects. We have the joint meetings bond counsel, Everett Johnson. We have the joint meetings financial advisor from Powell Capital, Julie Ellers. She'll be speaking also. So basically what we're here tonight is to talk about two projects that the joint meeting has upcoming. The first is their capital improvement project. Basically every couple of years the joint meeting reevaluates its capital improvement plan to see if there's new changes and new projects that need to be done to keep the facility up to date. And so the last time the capital improvement plan was evaluated, it was about 4 years ago, so it's time to consider it again. So Henry will go through those couple of projects that'll be impacted through the capital improvement plan. The second project that the joint meeting is dealing with is the flood mitigation project. This came about as a result of Sandy and flooding that had occurred on the site from the storm. Following the storm, there were some studies that were done, and we had calculated what the cost of making repairs, which was significant, and then we also calculated costs of what it would cost the joint meeting and the member municipalities if the facility was destroyed in a future flood, and that came into like the billions of dollars. And so as a result of that, FEMA decided that it made sense to fund this flood mitigation project. So this project costs approximately $99 million. However, the way it's structured, FEMA has said that it will pay up to 90% of the reimbursable costs. So that leaves a 10% cost for the member municipalities and the city of Elizabeth. And as you know, the joint meeting has 11 member municipalities plus the city of Elizabeth. So I will introduce Henry now to give a short presentation on what exactly these projects, as an engineering perspective, how they work.
Good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes. But I'm sorry, but for the sake of, because we're televised, if you could go to the mic, actually, that would help.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can move that. Thank you.
because if you don't speak into the mic, then it doesn't get picked up on television.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Henry Johnson. I'm with CME Associates. We're the consulting engineer for the joint meeting. As Joni pointed out, there are two projects. The first is a capital improvement plan. And what you see in front of you is a capital improvement plan. This is a live plan, and we update it about once every 3 to 4 years. And on this anniversary now, there are 3 projects that are slated to be improved or to be constructed in the next couple of years. And those projects are the ones that are in green, as you can see on the left-hand side. The 3 projects consist of, one is a waste gas burner, which burns the biogas that's generated by the anaerobic digesters. The second project is the improvement of a number of buildings, some of which are constructed in 1932, 1975, 1990. And some of these buildings are starting to deteriorate, and they need some tender, loving care. That's the second project. The third project is the green one at the bottom, and that's the construction of a building at the end of one of the tanks, which will replace an existing tunnel, which is a hazardous location, requires confined space entry rules, and by putting this building up here, we can eliminate that particular problem. Those projects, 3 projects, add up to about $17 million. The City of Elizabeth's share is 1/3 of that, and the rest of that $17 million is divided amongst the member municipalities. Any questions on those projects?
I think, if you wouldn't mind, because I think probably, I don't recall during my tenure on council, which is now 3 years, having a discussion with you guys, right? So I think for the folks at home and for all of us, I think maybe we just step back a little and just explain what is the joint meeting and what exactly are we talking about? We're talking about a wastewater treatment. If we could just give a little bit of background.
Okay. Back around 1897, a number of municipalities in this area between Summit and all the way down to Elizabeth got together, had a joint meeting on a matter of maintenance of their sewer systems. At the time, their little sewer systems connected up to local streams and rivers and was creating a health hazard, not unlike what happened in Europe many years ago when they had plague and serious diseases. So the town fathers at the time knew that they had to do something. So they had this joint meeting and decided that they had to get all of this waste that was hanging out in their neighborhoods, they had to get it away. So they built a trunk sewer system, large sewer system that starts here in Summit and finds its way all the way to the Arthur Kill in Elizabeth. At that, when they started to build that, which was in the early part of the last century, in the teens and the 20s, they also realized that at some point in time they would have to build a treatment plant. So they purchased a large piece of property in Elizabeth on which to build a treatment plant. By 1932, the initial treatment plant was completed and they started to treat the sewage. The treatment was only what they call primary treatment. It didn't treat the entire waste. It reduced the contamination by about 1/3, which was okay at the time. That was state of the art. As time went on, they had to upgrade it. So in the 70s, they expanded that treatment plant to what's called a secondary wastewater treatment plant. And that was a large project done in the 70s. Since that time, there have been other changes and additions, including generating stations. We now generate our own electricity using biogas from the anaerobic digesters. Now, all of this equipment over the years starts to wear out because it runs 24/7. Not like your car that only runs for a few minutes each day and can last years and years. This equipment runs all the time, so it wears out. And this capital improvement plan was designed to replace equipment as it wears out, as the years roll by. So this project now, those three projects, are part of that system. This is not the first time that your board has approved a capital improvement plan like this. It happens about once every 3 or 4 years.
Okay, thank you. I think that background is very helpful. And Summit's share of the capital improvement plan is about 9%.
Yes, it's,
And here at the bottom, is this for different, the different figures are for different years in which the projects are going to be done, or how is that?
yes, on the left-hand side, all the blue you see there, those are the projects that are completed. And then the next row, you'll see some amber colors. Those are projects that are under construction right now. They're almost completely finished. That started about 3-4 years ago. And the green is the 3 projects that are on this particular capital improvement plan, which we're seeking approval for. The rest of the projects, the pink projects, are those out in the future that we plan to do 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now.
And so this plan goes out till 2029, 2030?
Yep.
Where we are?
And 4 years from now, it'll go out to 33.
And of that Summit share is, if I read this correctly, going across,
3.8.
about $3.8 million.
That's the sum of all of them?
That's the Summit share.
Summit share.
The sum of
All of them, yes.
All
sum
of them,
all
yeah,
some,
yes.
Yes, yes.
What's current now
Let's
would
speak to the numbers
be,
in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Henry is going to speak to the physical
Got it, okay.
project.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? You have, because we also in our capital budget, we have project certain capital things that we would like to do in the next 10 years. Does this always, do you always get everything done over the time you're projecting, or is that somewhat fluid?
It's the pink are placeholders.
Yeah.
They move back and forth
Right, okay.
depending on whether something fails, or
Right.
if we see some part of the plant needs more attention,
Or if
then,
regulations change.
Right, okay, that's right, I
They
figured
move
that
back and
there is
forth.
some fluidity and some
Yes.
flexibility there, okay.
Anybody else have any questions?
the second project is the flood mitigation project. When Sandy hit us back in 2012, the water rose and inundated portions of the treatment plant. There was approximately $1 million worth of damage at that time. There could have been a lot more, except that we have our own generating station on site. So we're able to keep the treatment plant running, we're able to keep the pumps running. So some of the flood waters that came onto the site actually spilled into some of the lower tanks, and we pumped it right on out. So the amount of damage was minimized because we had the generating station. Had the generation station not been able to operate, and understand we're only within 6 inches of not being able to run it, because the water level got within 6 inches of the finished floor. 6 more inches of surge, and we would not have been able to run the generating station, and then the entire site would have been flooded, and all the buildings, and we would have approximately $60 million worth of damage. Added to that, there'd be a loss of service, which is estimated at $1.8 billion. So it would have been catastrophic, except for the fact that the generating station kept running. Mike?
Could you just explain to the audience, I mean, you just gave a monetary number, but just so people know, when you say loss of service, what does that mean to the average person?
You want me to handle that, Henry?
Yes, that'd be a good one for Joe.
Okay. By loss of service, it means that every man, woman, child, business, factory, industry would not be able to dispose of its wastes and would be forced to shut down. So for whatever period of time it would take to bring that system back in line, it was estimated that if it was out of line for 90 days, which is not unheard of since Passaic Valley was out of service for longer than that, it was a value of about $1.8 billion. That's with a B. And that was a calculation done by FEMA matrices.
Right, so I think that's important for people to understand that
Exactly.
that's a catastrophic problem.
Right.
You can't dispose of sewage for 3 months, so, thank you.
It's something we don't think about, but these guys do.
I mean, suppose something, God forbid, were to happen. What then happens with people's waste?
The Passaic Valley Sewerage System in Newark, which services 37 towns, was out of service because their power system is running through tunnels at the facility in Newark. When the water rose, it shorted out all their power. Aside from the fact that PSE&G lost power, they have 10 chambers along the Passaic River which were opened to release the sewage, raw sewage, into the Passaic River and also into the Hackensack River and into the Newark Bay. The joint meeting has no such facility. We do not have the capability of opening up our trunk lines to the rivers and streams, in particular the east and west branches of the Rahway River, or into the Arthur Kill. It has to come through the treatment plant. There is no alternative.
Yeah, what would happen is because the water was not being pumped through the treatment plant tanks would surcharge and overflow onto the ground. The trunk sewer that leads up to the treatment plant, which lies at a very flat slope all the way up through the city of Elizabeth and then beyond through Hillside and Union, that sewer would start to
Right.
surcharge, and it would stop. It would block up people's homes so they couldn't discharge to it, so they'd have backup in the homes, backup in the businesses, and then manholes would start popping, and you'd have sewage everywhere. It would be a catastrophic event.
Right, right. So we have to make sure people understand what we're talking about here.
Oh, yes, it's a really big deal.
It is big.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, go on, please, with your...
All right. We looked at a number of alternatives as to how to protect the treatment plant going forward. We looked at trying to protect individual buildings, but if you look on the site, there's like 15 different buildings that would have to be protected. And most of these buildings are masonry construction, just like this building. And you could put a dam in front of a door and keep the water from coming through the door. But as the water rises alongside the foundation, sooner or later it's going to come right through the foundation, because masonry walls cannot stand much of a hydrostatic load. They're not designed for it. So the water would then collapse the walls. So that was not an option. So we looked at two things: building a dike around the site or building a wall around the site. There's not enough room to build a dike out of soil, so a wall was the next best alternative. So the plan is to build a concrete wall around the entire perimeter of the site, which is approximately 41.5 acres. The wall will be supported on piles. There'll be a cutoff wall to rock, which is below, so that the water doesn't seep underneath. The wall will have several entrances, which are normally open, and then if there's going to be a storm surge, the walls would then be closed, and the treatment plant would then become an island onto its own. Inside of the treatment plant, there'll be a storm water pumping station, which will collect the rainwater that lands on the sites and pumps it over the wall out into the river. There's also going to be an effluent pumping station constructed. Right now, the treated sewage flows by gravity from the plant out to the Arthur Kill. In the event of a storm surge, it would not flow out by gravity, so we're going to have to pump it out. So a large pumping station has to be constructed on the site. There's also another site across the street, which is the biosolids facility. That's where we dewater sludge before disposing of it. It's a 3.5 acre site, and a wall would have to be built around that site as well.
On this map, it seems on the lower left side, lower left quadrant where the E is, there doesn't seem like a completion of a wall. Is that in?
Yes, there will be a cutoff wall built across there. It's not shown in the drawing because it's just sheeting driven down the ground. That's the red line you see. That's an actual concrete wall, but in that area, it's going to be sheeting driven down into the ground to prevent water from coming under the roadway and into the treatment plant site.
That portion of the facility is elevated.
Okay. Okay, all right.
And what's the blue over here?
The blue is an existing wall constructed by the Port of Authority for the railroad, and we're going to utilize that wall as part of our wall.
And is that wall going to go down, and, I mean, is that sufficient, that wall? I mean,
Yes, that's sufficient the way it's constructed. It was
Yeah.
built for the railroad approximately 2003.
And what's the height of that wall? Is it the same height as the wall you're constructing?
No, it's not. We wish it was, but it's not. So we're going to have to put a little appendage on top of that wall to make it high enough.
Mike?
And so this wall is going to be 22 feet high? Is that what
No,
I'm
the
reading?
top elevation is going to be elevation 22. The site varies between elevation 9 and elevation 14. So the wall is going to be between 8 and 13 feet high.
And for Sandy, what was the flood, the storm
The
surge? How high did that get?
Water surge elevation was 14.
14 feet,
Yes,
okay.
just 6 inches short of the CoGen building, which was 14 and a half.
and do you think the cogeneration facility is sufficient as it's built now?
There's going to have to be an addition to the CoGen building. Right now, it has 4 engine generators in it, and a space for 2 more generators. When we put in the new pumping stations, we're going to need more power in order to keep it running during an emergency situation. So we're going to add the 2 engines to the CoGen building, And then we're going to extend the power to the 3 new pumping stations, 2 stormwater pumping stations, an effluent pumping station, and we're going to extend the power across the street to the biosolids facility. Right now, the biosolids facility is powered separately by PSE&G and has no backup. When this is done, they will now have backup power.
And is this, the addition to the cogeneration facility and the backup at the biosolids facility, is that included in the 99 million?
Yes, it's all included.
And the area between the wall and what you would need for the expansion, there's sufficient area to do all of that? Because you're going to put a wall now, right, behind where the cogen facility is there, you're going to do these you're going to put in more generators at the cogen facility?
When the facility, when the cogeneration facility was initially planned and built, we opted for 2 additional platforms inside the building.
Oh, so it's
So
already...
the foundations are already there.
Okay, got
All we
it.
have to do is roll those engines in,
Got it.
plug them in.
Okay.
All the electrical switchgear associated with them is also there already.
What's the time frame for construction?
The entire project is probably a 4-year project, 4 to 5 years from, that includes design time, because it's not yet been designed. We've only done preliminary design so far in order to come up with an estimated cost.
The one last thing, I think it's important to say that, you know, Summit has already had some input into this discussion. I mean, we didn't talk about structure, but each of these 11 municipalities has a board seat on the joint meeting, and I think our current rep is Councilman Bowman. So that is the governance structure for the utility.
Councilman Bowman has a prior life experience in...
I do.
in this kind of stuff. So,
It's a great job.
Well, I mean, we're going to hear about some, as you said, some financials, but I
Yes.
certainly, speaking for myself, I appreciate your forward-thinking approach here. So,
You know, I think one thing we have to recognize is these guys keep coming with 6 inches, and that would have been a bad thing. And with the rising water levels, you know, we have to address this now, and that's what these guys are looking at doing. And it was a perfect storm with the tidal basin coming in at that time.
No rain.
And, right.
No rain.
So, exactly right. So I think that, you know, there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion. You know, I've supported everything these guys, that they're doing. And the other thing is I'll invite all you up here on the dais to come down. The tours that these gentlemen do and the facility is, you know, I know Mike has been down, but it's something really impressive. The fact that they have become, you know, almost becoming a power generator with the amount of level, the energy that they are creating. And you look at their utilities as a percentage of budget is minimal now as compared to 3 years ago. So, you know, kudos to the joint meeting for doing that.
no, thank you. I guess, you know, thinking about this, I mean, every summer we're right now in hurricane season, right? I mean, so any day now, you could have a hurricane that keeps on coming, churning up towards the East Coast. And you said your time frame is 5 years. Does that seem long?
Well, fortunately, time goes by pretty quickly. It's been 5 years, almost 6 years since Hurricane Sandy. We haven't had one since.
right.
And so we've had a lot of rain. We've had very high rainfall, but we have not had a hurricane hit the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area in that time. Hopefully it doesn't happen before we get this job done. But it's important to get this going now in anticipation that it can happen again in the future.
Right.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm Julie Ellers from Powell Capital Markets, financial advisor to the joint meeting.
Good evening. I'm Everett Johnson, shareholder with the law firm of Walensky, Goldman & Spitzer, bond counsel to the joint meeting.
So we're going to give you the short version of how the financing will work. As regards the capital improvement plan, the total cost is $17.3 million. And as that's been discussed, that's split between the 11 member municipalities and the city of Elizabeth. Summit's share will be $1.02 million. Assuming that the joint meeting votes in favor of it at the July meeting, then after that the financing portion would begin. Summit would have the choice between paying its assessment in cash by the following February. So we're talking about February of 2019, so you could plan ahead for that. Or alternatively, the NJIB, the New Jersey Investment Bank, stands ready to provide financing to all of the member municipalities of the joint meeting. And so that would involve applying to borrow money through the NJIB, and there's an application form to fill out. I would help you with that. I would draft it, make everything as easy as possible. There are ordinances to introduce and adopt. Everett would provide drafts of those, walk you through it. And then when the time comes to enter into that loan with the NJIB, which used to be called the Environmental Infrastructure Trust. You might know it as the EIT. They've changed their name recently and a few other of their policies. So if you chose to borrow, you would enter into a 3-year note at 0 interest, and 3 years would go by, during which time the project would be built, projects, those 3 that Henry discussed. And at the end of that, then the NJIB would provide long-term financing, or you could pay off the balance in cash at that time. So you could either pay cash next year or 3 years after that, or you could enter into a 20-year bond and pay your $1 million off over 20 years. So that's the short version, and this is similar to what's been done before through the EIT, which is now the NJIB. The only difference now is that the NJIB prefers to hold off on the long-term financing until the construction is done and the final numbers are tallied up. Does anyone have any questions before we talk about the wall, the flood mitigation piece? Okay?
The only thing I would add with that is, if you guys decide to undertake this via bond ordinance, we'll be looking for this council to introduce bond ordinance in August or September. Basically, we want to have all the municipalities who are going to issue debt to have the ordinances finally adopted and effective by November. So for timing purposes, that's what we're thinking.
So the flood mitigation project costs, we'll call it $100 million. And so FEMA will be reimbursing 90% approximately, and I'll come back to that in just a second. However, the full amount has to be borrowed first. So the way it would work is the municipalities collectively, in total, would apply to the NJIB for $100 million of financing. And we're going to ask everyone to do that because in addition to providing the financing, NJIB also has reimbursement specialists who are extremely knowledgeable about getting money through FEMA and expediting those reimbursements. So there'll be the loan, and then along with it, there'll be something called a memorandum of understanding, which will let NJIB apply on your behalf for the reimbursements, which is a really, really good thing. So you don't have to worry about it, and they get the money back promptly. So your share of the $100 million is $5.9 million, by the way. So you would enter into a short-term note with the NJIB for $5.9 million. And again, this would be a 3-year note with 0 interest. You would pay nothing for 3 years. So monies would be being spent, and as the wall and the CoGeneration things and the pumping stations are built, shortly thereafter, reimbursements would be coming back from FEMA, offsetting the amount that's being borrowed. When all is said and done, at the end of the day, the whole project would be built. That we expect there to be approximately $10 million that's still owed, of which your share, Summit's share, would be $589,000. And at that point, either you could pay the $589,000 in cash, or you could enter into a long-term bond through the NJIB and spread it out over many years. That's the nutshell of it. One thing that's very important to understand is that the NJIB has told us they will not close on loans with any of these, with any municipality unless the FEMA commitment is in place to their satisfaction. So right at this moment, the joint meeting is finalizing information with FEMA and answering all the questions and dotting i's and crossing t's. But when it comes time to close on the loan and to borrow your $5.9 million, the NJIB will not loan it to you unless FEMA is on board, signed up, ready to go to their satisfaction. Yes.
Are you anticipating the reimbursement process from FEMA? Would that money be in by the time the 3-year note expired, or do you think that there might be further lag, so after 3 years, the number may still be higher than that? What did you say, 589,000?
NJIB has boasted to us of reimbursement times of less than a month. Whether this
better than
exactly
Trenton,
will come
boy.
to pass, I can't say, but they've talked about that their skill is such that they expect reimbursements to be within 30 to 60 days.
And the reimbursements are done based off of the loan, but not as when you spend the money. So you're not going to spend all this money within a month.
Correct.
So it's based off the loan.
No, it's based off the invoices. So as you know.
Okay, so as the invoices come
As
in.
invoices come in
Yeah.
and projects being
Okay,
built.
I got you.
Then invoices are submitted by joint meeting to NJIB. NJIB then reviews and makes sure that all the proper paperwork that's necessary for FEMA to give us reimbursements is actually put together and executed, and then they submit that to FEMA, and FEMA reimburses the joint meeting. So it's on an as-you-go
Right.
basis.
So what is the thought process around construction time for this thing?
3 to 4 years.
So 3 to 4 years, okay.
The same time frame as the other one.
Is there any possibility that after FEMA gives its commitment, that for some reason that it doesn't go ahead and through the 3 or 4 years, that something changes and it says, okay, we had funding initially, we thought we had funding for this, we no longer have funding for it?
No, FEMA has indicated to the joint meeting that once a project is allocated, the money is allocated to a project, that money is allocated in that fiscal year and it's done, and it's the joint meetings. So we're meeting with FEMA on Thursday because there were a couple of questions about the project and why certain things were chosen, like electrical connections, why one thing was done versus something else. So we're still finalizing, but what's been explained is that once FEMA says it's all good, that's it. The money has been set aside and it's allocated for this project and it can't change.
And I think it's also important to note that the 90% number that we've been discussing for reimbursements is based upon a program that FEMA instituted for Hurricane Sandy. So normally, my understanding is that FEMA reimburses 70%. But because of the catastrophic nature and the impact of Hurricane Sandy, that a specific program that reimbursed 90% for Hurricane Sandy disaster relief, and that this will fit underneath that Hurricane Sandy disaster relief, even though it's many years later. That's how they're classifying our particular mitigation project.
You said that was 90%, FEMA will give 90% of reimbursable costs?
Yes.
Yes.
Is there any concern that the definition of reimbursable costs will change during the 3-year construction period? I mean, how do you know? Suppose they decide what's reimbursable today, is it still going to be reimbursable tomorrow? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I think that the concern to answer your question is, no, we're not really concerned about that. They're going to review the plans and the final plans and basically determine up front what they consider to be reimbursable or not reimbursable. And so at that point, we'll know, assuming that we're going to build according to our plans, which obviously we're going to have to,
Right.
what's acceptable to FEMA, what's not acceptable to FEMA. We're not going to be changing our plans once it's approved by FEMA. So if there's anything that's not reimbursable, they'll let us know that up front.
We have been alerted by NJIB that it's typical that there's some small costs that are part of the project that FEMA might set aside, so that the actual expected reimbursement might be 88%, for example, rather than 90, which is why we're using, the word approximate. So, but, it should be substantially close to 90%. And as Everett said, it's legislatively, it's under the 90% act.
Is there a possibility that the cost of the project would increase over the $99 to $100 million? And then what would happen as far as FEMA's commitment is, are they capped at a certain project cost number? And so if the differential increased, would that be all on the joint meeting members? Does that make sense as a question?
Yes, it does. I mean, the numbers have contingencies in them. So, it's always expected that a $99 million does include contingencies. Is there a possibility? I mean, I'll defer to engineers as to whether they think that's possible or not. But the other things there.
The estimated cost is based on preliminary drawings, which, by preliminary, we mean preliminary. All the details of what's going into the project are not on the drawings. But the cost we have has a generous contingency attached to it.
And what's that contingency?
It's about 20%, all right? Now, 20% for preliminary plans is pretty normal. And there are just so many details associated with building a massive project like this that we couldn't possibly come up with all those details in a preliminary plan. It just wouldn't happen. Even this structure right here, I'm sure that the original estimate was one thing and the final estimate was something else. Okay? But they will fund whatever the final estimate is, and whatever, not the final, whatever the bids are. That will be the truth of what it costs. They will fund 90% of that. As far as what may not be reimbursable, I've been down this road once before at the joint meeting back in the 70s. It was a 90% grant by the state and the EPA, and the only thing they didn't fund was part of the office complex where Mr. McGee sits right now. They didn't consider an office as fundable, all right? So his office didn't get fundable. Later, we built it anyhow, so he's able to enjoy it. But that's the type of thing that they might pick on, say that's not part of the flood. So we don't know what that's going to be yet, or if it's going to be there at all.
Anybody else? Matt?
Is there a significant cost to the NJIB's oversight of the process of getting the reimbursement?
Actually, they're providing a very significant benefit. There will be some fees associated. If you go to the long-term financing, there will be fees relative to the NJIB built into that. However, the long-term financing will benefit if you choose to go there, because the NJIB provides a certain portion of it at 0% interest, which, for example, might be 50%. Half of the bonding might be at 0% interest, and half would be at their AAA bond rate. So essentially, they're offering this financing for 3 years at 0%. So the NJIB effectively is subsidizing through its favorable borrowing terms the project as a whole. But yes, there would be some fees associated with it.
Just for what you just laid out about some meld between, for the long-term funding at 0 and their AAA rating, is that hold true as well for if we choose to go down that road for the capital, the capital
Yes.
raise?
Yes.
All right, so I'm sure finance can discuss those differences.
You also don't have to decide right now. The decision you would have to make shortly after the July meeting, assuming it's approved, is to decide then whether you're going to pay your assessment in cash or whether you're going to have the 3-year note. If you choose to go into the 3-year note, you don't have to decide now how that's going to play out at the far end of it, whether you're going to pay off your balance or enter into a bond.
Right.
At the
And
end.
as you said, there's no real fees associated with that 0% 3-year.
Yes.
It's free money.
Think of those rebates we get back at the end of the year.
Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.